If one day, the woman you love most in this world stands before the wedding altar and collapses in the middle of the ceremony's music, if that day comes and everyone turns away, leaving only you standing there, frozen, unsure whether you're the betrayer or the betrayed, what would you do? This is the story of Jane Carter, a woman from Seattle who once had everything: love, honor, family, until the truth was stolen from her. Betrayed by her stepmother and sister, Jane lost her child, her faith, and was forced to start over in a small house by Crescent Lake where every secret slowly comes to light. It's a journey through heartbreak, but also one of rebirth. Because sometimes, to find happiness, we must first survive the kind of loss we think will destroy us. If you've ever believed in love, been broken by it, or thought you could never begin again, stay with me. This story is for you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that we can walk together through the journey of Jane Carter, the woman who proved that happiness isn't magic, but a choice we make every single day. That morning in Seattle felt strangely unreal. The sun was out, yet clouds still drifted by, and the air was heavy with the scent of white lilies, a fragrance that always made Jane Carter feel both calm and uneasy. She stood before the mirror in the bridal dressing room of St. Augustine Church. The reflection showed a trembling young woman in a pure white wedding gown, the golden light from the window wrapping her skin in a thin, dreamlike haze. "Jane, are you okay?" her best friend's voice called softly from outside the door. Jane took a deep breath and tried to smile. "I'm fine. It just feels hard to believe. Everything happened so fast." End of 2. Her fingers brushed the slim silver ring on her hand, the keepsake from her late mother, who had passed when Jane was 10. That ring had constantly reminded her that happiness never came easily, but when it did, she must hold on tight. The organ began to play inside the church, and Jane felt her heart pounding. Hundreds of guests sat in silence, gazing down the long aisle lined with white rose petals. At the far end stood Logan Reed, the man she loved, the man she was about to call her husband. Dressed in a black suit, he looked toward her, his eyes like beacons of light in that radiant morning. Logan smiled, the kind of smile that always made Jane forget the world. He once told her that if the day ever came when he stood before the altar, he'd be afraid of nothing. "The only thing I'd ever fear," he'd said, "is not seeing you." And now, he was looking at her just as he had promised. Jane began walking, each step trembling but filled with joy. The rustle of her gown on the stone floor sounded like the soft rhythm of a heartbeat reaching for its dream. Logan reached out to take her hand, and his warmth made her eyes sting with tears. The priest began to speak. "Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It keeps no record of wrongs." Jane smiled at Logan. Every fear melted away. But then a voice broke through the air, freezing the entire room. "I'm sorry, but this wedding can't go on." Every head turned toward the back row. A young woman in a beige dress, with softly curled hair and a beauty edged in pride, stepped into the aisle, Opal Taylor, Jane's stepsister. The church erupted into whispers. Jane felt her knees lock in place. Opal walked forward, the light catching her calm, unsettling expression. "I know this isn't what anyone wants to hear," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere, "but I can't stay silent any longer. I'm pregnant with Logan Reed's child." The air shattered. Whispers turned to noise. The priest froze, trembling as he held his Bible. Jane stood motionless, eyes wide, lips parted but soundless. She could hear only the sound of her heart breaking into pieces. "What did you say?" Jane whispered. But in the silence, everyone heard her. Opal looked straight at her, tears glistening in her eyes, the kind of tears that only the naive could mistake for real. "I'm sorry, Jane. I never wanted this to happen. But the baby, it's the truth. Logan knows." Jane turned to Logan. He stood there, his face twisted in confusion. A chill spread through her chest. "Say something, Logan." He said nothing. "Say something," she screamed, her voice snapping like a string pulled too tight. Logan shook his head. "Jane, I didn't know about this." But no one was listening anymore. The crowd murmured louder. Cameras flashed. Thea Taylor, Jane's stepmother, stood, pretending to be shocked, then hurried down the aisle to embrace Opal. "Oh, my poor girl. How could you endure this all alone?" Jane stared, the scene spinning around her like a distorted dream. Faces blurred, Light from the stained glass fractured into shards of red, gold, and violet. A prolonged ringing filled her head. Then nothing. "Jane!" Logan shouted, rushing toward her as she collapsed, but his voice faded into nothingness. The last thing Jane saw was the vaulted ceiling high above, sunlight pouring through like a rain of glass, and Logan's face dissolving into tears. Jane woke to the sharp smell of disinfectant. White light stung her eyes. She tried to sit up, but the IV line pulled her back. A nurse approached, her voice gentle as a whisper. "Miss Carter, you're awake. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days? Jane's voice was hoarse. "And Logan?" The nurse hesitated. "He came by a few times, but your mother, Mrs. Thea, told us not to let him in." Jane sat still, her chest hollow. In her mind replayed Opal's words, her trembling voice, that false look of sorrow. "I'm pregnant with Logan Reed's child." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't even know when she had started crying. All she knew was that everything that once made up her life was now nothing but a torn photograph. That afternoon, Thea arrived. She wore an elegant black dress, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. She set them down beside the bed. "I'm so glad you're awake, Jane." Jane didn't look at her. "You're not my mother." Thea sighed, her tone tender, practiced. "I know you're hurting, dear, but what happened? It's the truth. Logan deceived both of us." Jane clenched the sheets. "I want to see him." "You shouldn't." Thea sat down slowly. "He's a mess right now, and seeing him will only make the pain worse." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Inside was an ultrasound image. At the corner, the name read, "Patient, Opal Taylor. Gestational age, 12 weeks. It's sad," Thea said softly. "But perhaps God wants you to understand some loves are meant only to teach us how to let go." Jane stared at the image. The blurry black and white shapes spread across her life like stains. She wanted to scream, to tear everything apart, but all she could whisper was, Get out of my life." When the door closed, Jane curled beneath the blanket and cried quietly. Outside the window, Seattle rain fell long and unending, like a song with no final note. 3 days later, she was discharged. As soon as she stepped outside the hospital gates, she saw Logan waiting, his grey coat damp, his hair tousled, his eyes tired. "Jane," he said softly, "I just want to talk." She stopped. "What's left to say? How do you explain that?" "I don't know. I swear, I don't know anything about it." Jane let out a bitter laugh. "Do you think I'm stupid enough to believe your oaths now?" Logan took a step forward, but she moved back. "Don't. If you have any dignity left, stay away from me." He stayed silent, then murmured, "I'm not going anywhere, not even if you hate me." Jane turned away. She didn't look back. Rain began to fall again as she walked off, every step heavy. Behind her, Logan remained standing in the rain until her silhouette disappeared into the crowd. That night, Jane returned to the small apartment she and Logan had once chosen together. The lock had been changed. The side window was nailed shut. A neighbor stepped out hesitantly. "They moved out. Your mother said you wouldn't be coming back." Jane froze. She took a step back, staring at the building that had once been filled with love and now was nothing but cold walls. She wandered for hours through Seattle's rain-soaked streets, beneath flickering neon lights. Every passerby was a stranger. She, who once had everything, now had nothing but trembling hands and a cold silver ring. Close to midnight, she sat on the steps of a closed cafe. Only a few coins are left in her pocket. She turned on her phone, scrolling through old messages from Logan. "Tomorrow, we start a new life, Jane." She deleted them all. Under the rain, she looked up at the grey sky. No stars. And in that moment, she understood it was truly over. Yet, somehow, a faint spark of hope flickered inside her. A memory of her father's old house by Crescent Lake came to mind, a place no one knew, where no one would look for her. Maybe that was the only place she could begin again, if she still had the strength. She stood, breathing deeply. Her wedding dress was now just a wrinkled remnant beneath her raincoat. But Jane Carter knew. The day she was betrayed was also the day she had to save herself. The next morning, Seattle was still raining. The June rain here never came in storms, just enough to dampen your shoulders, enough to make you feel small. Jane sat on a bench at the bus station, a small suitcase by her side. Inside were only a few clothes, and an old photo of her father. She had left the hospital without telling anyone, though there was no one left to tell. On her phone, dozens of missed calls, reporters, unknown numbers, even Opal. Jane powered it off. She didn't want to hear another word. Every ring, every name, felt like a fist closing around her heart. When the number 5 bus arrived, she climbed aboard and took a window seat. Raindrops streaked down the glass, turning Seattle into a blurred, dreamlike city. Familiar streets, mirrored towers, flickering signs, and somewhere out there, the life she had just lost. She had once thought she knew Logan. He was quiet, steady, with those calm brown eyes that always made her feel safe. They'd met 3 years earlier, at a fall writing retreat, when Jane was working as an editor for a small literary magazine. Logan had come with his first unfinished manuscript. He'd been so shy he could barely meet her gaze. And now, that same man stood at the center of the worst storm of her life. The bus stopped. Jane got off and slipped into a small cafe near Pike Place Market. She ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching the crowd pass by. A waitress approached with a gentle smile. "Would you like some sugar with that?" Jane shook her head. "No, thank you. I need it real." When she left the cafe, she stopped by the bank. She needed to withdraw some cash to rent a temporary place, but when the teller handed her card back, 3 words froze her blood. "Account is closed." "I'm sorry. What do you mean, closed?" she asked, her voice trembling. The teller double-checked the screen, then said quietly, "By request of your legal guardian, Mrs. Thea Taylor, Miss Carter, according to our records, has been appointed temporary financial custodian due to your unstable mental state following the wedding incident." Jane went still. "Unstable? Mental state?" "Yes, there's a medical certification from the hospital." Jane walked out of the bank in a daze, heart pounding. She couldn't even remember how she got outside. The sky darkened, and she stood on the wet sidewalk, clutching her useless card as if holding on to the last fragment of her past. Everything was being taken from her piece by piece, and she was powerless to stop it. That evening, she went back to her apartment. The door was still locked. She rang the bell again, and to her surprise, it opened slightly. A middle-aged woman peeked out. "Who are you?" I live here." "Jane Carter." The woman frowned. "This apartment's been rented out. Mrs. Thea said you'd moved to a mental care facility near Portland." Jane let out a brittle laugh. "I'm not insane. I was just betrayed." The door shut. Jane leaned against the wall, hands over her head. She felt like a ghost wandering through the ruins of her own life. No home, no money, no dignity. She walked for hours through the damp, empty streets. Every step felt like treading over shards of herself. Then, on a corner beneath a bookstore awning, she saw him, Logan, his clothes soaked, his hair dripping. "Jane," he said softly, stepping forward, "I've been waiting all day. You're following me." Her voice was cold. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." "Okay." She let out a hollow laugh. "You destroyed my life, and now you want to check if I'm okay." Logan stepped closer, rain glistening in his eyes. "I didn't do it, Jane. I swear." She looked straight at him. "Swear on what, Logan? On Opal's child?" For the first time, she saw him cry. His voice broke. "I don't know why she did this. But Jane, you have to believe me, I never betrayed you." Jane turned away. "Then go take care of your child, Logan. I'm nothing to you now." She walked off, leaving him under the rain, his figure standing alone in the yellow light, like a statue carved from sorrow in the Seattle night. The city seemed to swallow Jane whole. Every street led her back to the past she longed to forget, but couldn't. The next morning, she went to the magazine office where she had worked. Her nameplate was gone. On the desk lay an envelope with a short, formal note. "We regret to inform you that, due to the public impact of your recent personal situation, the company is terminating your contract." Jane wasn't surprised. She packed what little was left, a notebook, a pen, and a photo of her and Logan from their trip to Oregon last fall. She almost threw it away, then tucked it into her coat instead. Letting go was never as easy as she wished. After leaving the office, she went to a small law firm where an old friend, Catherine Mills, worked. Catherine's eyes widened the moment she saw her. "Jane, my God, look at you. What happened was awful." Jane spoke quietly. "I need to know if they can legally freeze my accounts." Catherine flipped through some papers, frowning. If they have medical proof and are next of kin, yes, temporarily. But only for 30 days. After that, you can appeal. Jane, perhaps you should consider leaving Seattle for a while. Everything here, it's all under their control. Leave? Go where? Catherine hesitated, then asked, Your father's house, is it still yours? Jane looked up. At Crescent Lake. Yes. If you still have the deed, it might be the only thing they haven't touched. A faint spark lit inside her. She remembered the old wooden house nestled among pine trees, where her father had spent his final years. Far away, quiet, forgotten, but maybe the only place she could still call her own. She left the office. The rain hadn't stopped, but it didn't feel as cold anymore. In her hand, she held a minor, rusted key she had always carried out of habit. She gripped it tightly. On the bus leaving Seattle, Jane watched the skyline fade behind her. The city that she once thought would hold her forever was now just a memory. As the bus crossed the Tacoma Bridge, she turned on her phone. A message appeared from Logan. I know you won't believe me, but I'm trying to prove the truth. Please don't disappear. She read it over and over, then deleted it, not out of hatred, but out of fear of hope. 3 hours later, the bus stopped at a small station outside Port Angeles. Jane stepped down, suitcase in hand. No one waited for her, only the white mist and the scent of damp wood. She called a cab and gave the driver the address to Crescent Lake. The car turned onto a dirt road blanketed with pine needles. Through the fog, the old cabin appeared weathered, grey with age, but still standing. Jane stepped out, her hands trembling. The door was stiff, but when she turned the key, the lock clicked open with a dry snap. The air inside smelled of dust and rain. She turned on her flashlight. Everything was covered in cobwebs, yet on the table still sat a framed photo of her father, and beneath it, a note, For my daughter, the one who's always stronger than she knows. Jane sank onto the wooden floor, staring at the empty room. Outside, the wind moved through the forest, whispering like her father's voice. For the first time in days, she cried, really cried. There was no one left to hold on to, nothing left to lose. But maybe, just maybe, this was where she could begin again. That night, she lit the fireplace and curled up on the old sofa, listening to the rain against the porch. Here, far from the city, no lights, no headlines, no lies, there was only her, and the flicker of a small, stubborn flame. She whispered into the dark, Dad, I won't let them destroy me. The firelight danced in her eyes, fragile, but unyielding. And though she had no idea what tomorrow would bring, Jane Carter knew one thing for sure. She was still here, and as long as she was, she would fight to reclaim everything, no matter the cost. The first morning at Crescent Lake was eerily quiet. When Jane woke, the pale blue light of dawn filtered through the wooden window, casting a faded shade of memory on the ceiling. Somewhere beyond the pines, birds called to each other, and the soft sound of water lapped against the shore. It all felt like a dream. This little house had once belonged to her father, Mr. Carter, a quiet man who had spent his life surrounded by trees and lake water. He'd passed away 3 years ago, leaving Jane a brief will and an old key. Back then, she'd been too busy with work, with love, with a bright future ever to return. Now, the house was the only place left that still welcomed her. She walked through the rooms, every object a whisper of the past. Her father's writing desk, the old rocking chair, a dusty radio that still crackled faintly when she turned it on. She cleaned all morning, wiping every window frame, every wall, until the air smelled faintly of pine and soap instead of dust and loss. When she opened the last drawer in her father's study, she found a yellowed envelope marked, For Jane, when you return. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single folded sheet, her father's familiar handwriting. My daughter, if you're reading this, it means you've lost something. But don't lose yourself. Remember, truth can be hidden, but never erased. Don't trust Thea, and never let them convince you that you're insane. At the bottom, scrawled in shakier handwriting, was another line. In the basement, you'll find what you need. Jane sat still, tears dripping onto the page. Her father had known. He had known something about Thea, the woman the world believed was kind and gentle. She grabbed a flashlight and opened the basement door. Cold air rushed up from below. The wooden steps groaned beneath her feet. Down there, the dim light revealed stacks of wooden crates. She opened them one by one, old documents, bank statements, photographs. and letters her father had written but never sent. One photo slipped from her hand. It showed her father standing beside Thea. Thea's hand rested on his shoulder, but his eyes looked away, stiff and distant. On the back was a note, "She wants everything." Jane pressed the photo to her chest, the old ache rushing back. The years with Thea hadn't been a family, they had been a performance. Opal was adored, while she was always the stepchild, the one who should know her place. Outside, light rain began to fall. Jane stayed in the basement, reading through every page. Most of the documents showed how Thea had transferred her father's accounts into her own name after his death, all perfectly legal. But buried beneath the piles, Jane found one unsigned document, a separate account in her name. Her father had left something for her, something Thea had never found. Jane folded the paper carefully and hid it in a small box. In that moment, she realized she wasn't completely powerless. She still had something, a fragment of the truth, and maybe that was enough to start again. That evening, as fog drifted over the lake, Jane sat by the fire with a cup of hot tea. She thought of Logan, the man she had loved, as if he were air itself. She remembered the way he looked when she collapsed at the altar, the way he said, "I didn't know," but stayed silent before everyone. Sometimes silence killed love faster than betrayal. The sound of an engine outside snapped her out of thought. She quickly turned off the light and peered through the window. Headlights cut through the mist. A tall figure in a grey coat stepped out of a truck, carrying something. She opened the door, the cold rushing in. "Who's there?" Logan turned. "It's me. Don't be afraid." Jane froze. "What are you doing here?" He set the bags down on the porch. "Catherine told me you came here. I brought some groceries. The nearest store's an hour away." "You didn't have to." "I know," he said softly. "But I wanted to." She looked at him, her eyes calm as the lake. "Do you think a few bags of food can make up for everything?" "No," Logan replied quietly. "I just want you to know I'm still here." Jane said nothing. She stepped back inside and closed the door. But through the window, she saw him stay. He sat in his truck, staring out at the lake, the soft glow from the dashboard lighting his tired face. She saw him pick up his phone, type something, then put it down again, never sending it. That night, Jane couldn't sleep. She heard the rain, the hum of the truck's engine starting and stopping, the wind rustling the trees, tiny sounds that somehow carried all her memories. And somewhere between waking and dreaming, she realized Logan was still out there, sleeping in his car. The next morning, Jane opened the door. Logan was still there, head tilted against the seat, his coat damp with dew. She stood quietly for a moment, then tapped on the window. "You don't have to stay here," she said. Logan stirred and smiled weakly. "I know, but I don't know where else to go. I just needed to make sure you're okay." "Do I look okay to you?" she asked, her voice cool. "No," he admitted, "but I know you're stronger than you think." Jane turned away, went into the kitchen, and came back with a cup. "Black coffee," she said. "If you're still planning to sit out there." Logan took it, their fingers brushing for a heartbeat. Neither spoke. After a while, Jane asked, "Did you know what Thea did to my father?" Logan shook his head. "Only that she controlled everything. But did your father leave you something?" Jane didn't answer. She just looked out at the thin mist rising over the lake. Maybe. That morning, they worked side by side to restore the house. Logan replaced the broken porch beams, fixed the windows, while Jane wiped the dust from her father's desk. When sunlight filtered through the glass, for the first time in weeks, she felt a small sense of peace. At noon, they ate on the porch steps. Logan told her about his own downfall, how he'd been suspended after the wedding, labeled the man who ruined it all. "I've got nothing left," he said with a faint smile. "So maybe now, you and I are the same." Jane looked at him, then said quietly, "You still have faith. All I have are old papers." "Then let's start from there," he said. She frowned. "You're crazy." "No," he said, eyes steady. "I'm in love with you." Jane went silent. The word love felt like a blade, familiar and painful all at once. She didn't respond. But that night, before going to bed, she left a blanket on the porch. No words, but Logan understood. Days passed. Logan kept coming back. He never pushed her to talk. He chopped firewood, cleared the garden, fixed the roof sometimes, just sat with her, watching the lake. Once, Jane asked, "Why are you still here? After everything?" He looked out at the horizon. Because I think someone wanted to tear us apart. It wasn't fate." Jane lowered her head, giving a slight nod. In her eyes flickered something not yet trust, but no longer hatred. At the end of the month, the moon rose high, its reflection rippling over the still water. Jane sat on the porch, writing in her notebook. "Today, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Maybe I'm not ready to forgive, but maybe I've stopped hating." Footsteps approached softly behind her. Logan's voice came, low and gentle. "You're still up?" Jane smiled faintly, her tone lighter than before. "Just rewriting my life, from the first chapter." Moonlight fell across her face, and Logan had to look away in that moment. Jane was no longer the broken bride he'd once seen in that church, but a woman learning to stand again in the dark. The quiet days by Crescent Lake drifted by slowly, like a sad, unfinished song. Jane had grown used to the chill of dawn, the faint smell of weak coffee in the small kitchen, and the quiet presence of Logan. Each morning, she heard him chopping wood on the porch, sometimes whistling a tune she didn't recognize. Life had found a fragile rhythm until the morning a grey envelope appeared in her mailbox. It bore the seal of the King County Court. Defendant. Jane Carter. Plaintiff. Opal Taylor. Her hands shook as she tore it open. The words hit like cold steel. Petition to review temporary guardianship of minor, Gracelyn Carter, Reed. S1. Below was the stated reason: potential mental instability and behavior detrimental to the welfare of the child. Jane read it again and again, her mind blank. Every word was a blade. They didn't just want her happiness, they tried to erase her from her daughter's life. She stepped onto the porch, letter in hand, eyes empty as she stared at the lake the wind bit against her skin. Logan was sawing wood nearby. When he saw her face, he dropped everything and ran to her. "What happened?" She handed him the paper. He read it slowly and went silent. "This can't be real," he whispered. "They can't do this." "They are doing it," Jane said, her voice trembling. "Thea's got lawyers. She's got money. And me? I've got nothing but this house." Logan's grip tightened on the page, his expression darkening. "I'll find a lawyer. Catherine can help." "No," Jane said firmly. "I'll handle it myself. I don't need you to save me." "Oisand, Jane." She cut him off, tears in her eyes. "You don't understand. All of this started because I trusted the wrong people. I need to stand up on my own this time, even if I lose." Logan fell silent, then nodded. "I understand. But let me stand outside that courtroom door. I won't say a word, so that you'll know you're not alone." Jane didn't answer. But when he left, she watched him go for a long time, her chest tightening with something she didn't want to name. He'd meant what he said. He'd never truly left her. She just hadn't been ready to forgive. 3 days later, Jane began preparing for court. She sat at the dining table surrounded by papers: Gracelyn's birth certificate, school records, medical files, photos, and the small handwritten letters her daughter used to leave on her desk. A small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. In childish handwriting, it read, "Mommy, I love you. I'm not afraid of the rain anymore, because you said rain is just the sky crying a little." Jane pressed the note to her chest and sobbed, not the violent kind of crying, but the quiet, breaking kind, as if all the strength she'd carried for so long had finally melted away. The hearing took place on a misty morning in Seattle. The King County Courthouse was cold, its marble floors gleaming under sterile light. Jane wore an old coat and clutched her files tightly. When she walked in, she saw Opal sitting across the room dressed in soft pastels, perfectly made up, eyes lowered with practiced humility. Thea sat beside her, her face carved in stone. Logan sat in the back row. He gave a slight nod, saying nothing. The hearing began. Thea's attorney stood, reading the charges in a flat, deliberate tone, each word a needle. "Miss Jane Carter has displayed signs of emotional instability following a public incident at her wedding. She has exhibited violent behavior, fainting spells, and has been under medical supervision. She currently lives in isolation, without stable employment or income." Jane's fists clenched. She hadn't realized how deeply they had twisted her life into a weapon. Then Opal was called to testify. She began to cry right on cue, voice trembling just enough. "My sister. She hit me during her wedding. I want to protect my niece from an unsafe environment." A video played the edited footage from the wedding. Jane screaming, collapsing, cut, spliced, framed to look like madness. The courtroom was silent. Jane bowed her head. Her tears fell onto the papers in her lap. When it was finally her turn, she stood. Her hands shook, but her voice, though soft, carried clearly through the room. "Your Honor, I'm not insane. I was betrayed. All I want is to be a mother." She swallowed hard. "Gracelyn is my daughter. I'm not perfect, but I love her with everything I have left." Across the room, Thea smiled the quiet, satisfied smile of someone who'd learned to win by destroying others. When the court recessed, Logan approached, resting a hand on Jane's shoulder. "You did well," he said gently. Her eyes were red. "I'm not going to win, Logan." He shook his head. "You already won because you stood your ground." Old end. That afternoon, the judge returned with the temporary ruling. The court grants provisional guardianship of the minor, Gracelyn Carter, Reed, to Mrs. Opal Taylor. Miss Jane Carter is granted supervised visitation twice a month. Silence filled the courtroom. Jane barely heard the rest. The words blurred into a dull ringing in her ears. In the hallway, she saw Logan waiting for her. His eyes held sorrow and helplessness. She walked past him without a word. But when the elevator doors closed, she leaned against the wall and finally let herself cry. That night, she returned to Crescent Lake. The cabin was dark. She collapsed onto the sofa, not bothering to turn on the light, listening only to the wind pushing through the cracks in the door. The emptiness rose inside her like a flood of water. Everything, her child, her name, her life had been taken. All that remained was the house. And herself. Near midnight, a knock echoed on the door. She didn't move at first. Then came Logan's voice, hoarse through the rain. "Jane, please, open up." She rose slowly and opened the door. The porch light revealed his face wet with rain, exhausted. "I didn't know what else to do," he said. "I can't just watch you go through this alone." Jane looked at him, her eyes dry and hollow. "What can you do, Logan? They've already won." "Not yet," he said, voice low but steady. "I found something. I asked Catherine to pull your hospital records. The report about your mental instability. It's fake. The signature on it isn't from your attending doctor." Jane froze. "What?" "Someone paid to have it altered," he said. A spark of life flickered in her chest. She took the file from him, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. The stamps, the names, all looked real. But the handwriting, the signature, it didn't match. "I'll find more proof," Logan said firmly. "I owe you that much." Jane looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you still doing this?" "Because I love you," he said without hesitation. "Not to make you forgive me, but to set you free." Jane didn't answer. Only the sound of wind filled the silence, and the soft glow of the firelight flickered across two faces, two people who had once been everything to each other. After he left, Jane sat alone for a long time, reading the report again and again. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't dared to touch: hope. She stood and looked out across the misty lake. The moonlight rippled faintly over the water, like a mirror of the past. "Gracelyn," she whispered, "I'm going to bring you home, even if I have to walk through hell to do it." Outside, the wind shifted. A single leaf fell onto the lake's surface, spun once, then sank into the depths, and Jane knew her real battle had only just begun. That morning at Crescent Lake, sunlight finally broke through the kind of rare light that slipped between endless days of Washington rain. It shimmered through the fog, spreading across the lake like liquid silver. Jane stood by the window, watching. She hadn't slept. All night, she'd reread the files Logan had brought. Every page made her shiver: fake reports, forged signatures, fabricated diagnoses. Thea had built an entire maze of lies to strip her of her dignity. "He was right," Jane whispered to herself. "I'm not insane. They are the liars." She brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the small wooden table. Steam rose gently, blurring her reflection in the cup. Then, suddenly, a wave of nausea hit her. She set the cup down, her hand trembling. It wasn't the first time it had been happening for weeks, along with a strange, persistent fatigue. She'd blamed it on stress until this morning, when a shaft of light fell across her belly and a flicker of instinct made her freeze. Fear and wonder tangled inside her chest. She searched a drawer until she found an old pregnancy test, probably left over from the days she'd lived with Logan. Her hands shook as she waited, every second stretching into eternity. When two red lines appeared, Jane sank to the floor, one hand over her mouth, the other over her stomach. Tears welled up not from fear, not entirely from joy, but from something more profound. In a world where everything had been stolen, her body had quietly guarded one precious truth, the child of her and Logan. The cabin was silent. The wind moved softly through the eaves, and the lake murmured against the shore. Jane sat for a long time, then took out a blank sheet of paper and wrote, "Dad, I'm not alone anymore." By noon, Logan arrived as he often did, carrying groceries. But when he saw her standing on the porch, pale, tired, and somehow radiant, he knew something was different. "Jane," he said quietly. She handed him the test result. Logan stared at it, then looked up in shock. "You're—" Jane nodded, her voice barely a whisper. 11 weeks. Silence settled between them, fragile, charged. They stood facing each other like two survivors before a wound that had started to heal, yet still ached when touched. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "It's yours," she said, meeting his eyes. "The night before the wedding." Logan stepped closer, stopping midway across the porch. Sunlight fell across his face, drawn, weary, but full of emotion. He wanted to reach for her, but didn't. "I don't know what to say, Jane. I'm happy and terrified." She gave a trembling laugh, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Me too. I'll take responsibility," he said. "I don't need you to take responsibility," she cut in. "I just need you to tell the truth. Did you ever betray me?" Logan held her gaze steady, unwavering. "No, I never did. Opal made it all up, and I'm going to prove it." "How?" "DNA testing. I've filed a request with the court for a paternity test between her and the baby. If she's really pregnant, the truth will come out." Jane sat down on the porch steps, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "If she's lying, they'll do everything they can to hide it. Then I'll find another way," Logan said. "I swear this time you won't fight alone." Jane looked at him. Doubt still shadowed her eyes, but beneath it was a faint spark, small and fragile, but warm, like the first flicker of fire after a long winter. That night, Logan left with the documents. Jane stayed at the table, writing in her journal. "Perhaps the cruelest thing about life is how it forces us to be born again from loss. But maybe that's how we remember we can still love, even after being shattered." Hensley. Outside, the moon cast a pale path across the lake. Jane touched her belly. "Little one," she whispered, "if you can hear me, I won't let anyone take you away." A lone owl called from the forest, its cry mournful, yet steady. For the first time in months, Jane felt something like peace, a reason to keep breathing. In the days that followed, she transformed. She ate less, slept more, and smiled sometimes when her hand brushed against her stomach. The warmth in the cabin no longer came from the fire, but from within her. Logan still came every day. He didn't talk much. He fixed the roof, chopped wood, and brought her favorite foods. He avoided mentioning the court, knowing she needed to be calm. Yet in his eyes lived a quiet blend of guilt and hope. One afternoon, while he was repairing the porch roof, Jane came out with a cup of ginger tea. "You know," she said softly, "every morning I wake up afraid they'll find out about this." Logan looked down from the ladder. "I won't let them touch you." Jane smiled faintly. "You can't promise that, Logan. Thea doesn't just destroy, she controls. But this time, she won't win." He watched her, admiration flickering in his eyes. "You've changed, Jane. Maybe because I'm not alone anymore." He climbed down, standing before her. "There's something I need you to know." "What is it?" "I'm not here out of guilt. I'm here because I never stopped loving you." Jane looked at him for a long time, her voice low but steady. "Don't say that, not until the truth is clear. When it is, if you're still here, I'll believe you." Logan nodded. "Then I'll wait." That evening, as his truck disappeared down the dirt road, Jane sat by the door, watching the taillights fade through the trees. For the first time, fear and faith coexisted in her heart. The next morning, Catherine called. Her voice was quick, urgent. "Jane, I just found something. Opal went back to the same private clinic she claimed did her ultrasound, but the dates don't match. The scans aren't hers. There's a chance. She was never pregnant." Jane froze, clutching the phone. "What? I need more proof. But if this is true, everything could turn around. Logan needs confirmation from the hospital. Jane lifted her gaze toward the window. Rain had begun to fall again softly, as if even the sky knew it was time to wash itself clean. That night, Logan returned, tension etched into his face. "Jane, any news?" "Yes. Catherine thinks Opal may never have been pregnant at all." His eyes lit up. He clenched his fists. "I knew it. I knew she was lying." "Don't celebrate yet," Jane said calmly. "We need proof." "I'll find it," he promised. "I won't fail you again." Jane studied him, her voice quieter now. "If it's true, would you forgive them?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'll make sure our child doesn't grow up in a world built on lies." Jane smiled sadly, her hand resting on her belly. "Our child, it sounds strange but beautiful." Outside, the rain tapped softly against the roof. Logan sat beside her, saying nothing. Together, they listened to the rhythm of it, their silence, no longer heavy, but full of fragile hope. Before leaving, Logan paused at the door. "I'll be back soon with proof." "Be careful," Jane said quietly. "Thea doesn't let anyone escape easily." He nodded, determination hardening his voice. "I've got nothing left to lose except the truth." As the door closed and the wind swept through the porch, Jane stood still, her heart a storm of fear and faith. In the dim light of the cabin, she placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "Little one, if your father's right, we're going to be free." Outside, Crescent Lake lay still, but beneath its surface, tiny ripples began to spread quiet, persistent, like the new life stirring within the woman who once thought hers was over. A week after their last conversation, Seattle was once again drowning in rain. It wasn't a heavy downpour, just endless, steady rain, the kind that blurred the city into gray. Logan Reed drove straight through it, his hands gripping the wheel as if racing against the dark itself. He had never been a man prone to anger, but this morning, when he received the file Catherine had sent the original hospital records for Opal Taylor, he knew silence was no longer an option. The dates didn't match. The ultrasound was recorded nearly 3 weeks after Opal had publicly claimed her pregnancy. And the signature at the bottom? A dermatologist. A cheap lie. But that lie had destroyed an entire life. Logan's car screeched to a stop in front of a sleek glass tower in downtown Seattle, the building where Thea Taylor and Opal lived. He stepped out into the rain, his coat plastered to his skin, his eyes burning with something between fury and despair. The security guard blocked his way. "I need to see Mrs. Thea Taylor. She doesn't take visitors." Logan pulled out his phone, displaying the document on the screen. "If you don't let me in, I'll call the police and report falsified medical records." That was enough. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. Logan rode the elevator to the 21st floor, his heart pounding. Images flashed in his mind, Jane collapsing at the altar, her broken eyes as she looked at him, believing he'd betrayed her. He knew, if he didn't act now, he'd lose her forever. The doors opened. The penthouse glowed under warm yellow light, impeccable, sterile, lifeless. Opal sat on the couch, her hair neatly tied, wearing a white dress, no sign at all of pregnancy. "Logan," she said, surprised, though her lips still curved into that familiar, polished smile. "You should have called first." He stepped closer. "If I had, you'd have rerun." From behind her, Thea appeared, holding a glass of wine. "Well, well, Logan Reed, to what do we owe the pleasure? Have you come to apologize?" Logan's voice was sharp and cold. "No, I came to demand a DNA test." "And?" The room went still. The rain against the glass grew louder. Opal scoffed. "You're accusing me? After what you did to my sister?" "Not accusing, stating." He threw the file onto the table. "The dates don't match. The doctor isn't even a specialist. If you're truly pregnant, prove it. Take a DNA test today." Thea sipped her wine, her calm, almost theatrical. "You're insulting my daughter. Leave now, or I'll call my attorney." "You should," Logan said, voice low and steady. "Because when the police investigate, they'll find this, and they'll find what you did to Mr. Carter's estate, too." Thea froze. For a fleeting moment, fear flickered in her eyes, but she quickly smoothed her expression back into its usual mask. "You have no proof." "Not yet," Logan said. "But I will." Opal rose, tears welling on cue. "You hate me that much. Can't you see I've suffered too?" "You don't suffer," Logan said quietly. "You just lie." He turned toward the door, but Thea's voice followed him, sharp as glass. Be careful, Mr. Reed. Some battles can't be won, even when you tell the truth. He didn't look back. I'm not trying to win. I want Jane to live again. The elevator doors slid shut. Inside the penthouse, Thea's expression hardened. That woman needs to disappear. For good. Opal trembled. Mother, what are we going to do? What we've always done, Thea said, setting down her wine. Clean up our messes. Oh. That evening, rain still fell over Crescent Lake. Jane stood on the porch, one hand resting on her belly as Logan's truck pulled in. His face was drawn, pale from exhaustion. Where were you all day? She asked. Seattle, he said hoarsely. I saw Thea and Opal. Jane's breath caught. You went alone? I had to. I needed to look them in the eye and know. And now you do? He nodded. They're lying. Thea tried to hide it, but I saw fear in her eyes. Jane sank into the wooden chair, her hands trembling. You shouldn't have gone. They're dangerous. I know. But I couldn't let them keep controlling you. Outside, the rain tapped against the roof like the slow beat of a heart. Jane looked toward the lake, her voice barely a whisper. If they find out I'm pregnant, they won't stop. Logan took her hand. Then we move faster. Night fell. The wind howled off the lake, sharp and cold. Jane drifted into uneasy sleep, waking again and again to phantom sounds outside. Then glass shattered. She bolted upright. Logan! He rushed in with a flashlight. One window was broken, and the curtains whipped in the wind. On the wall, scrawled in dripping red paint, were 2 words, baby killer. Jane froze, her arms wrapping protectively around her belly. Logan ran outside but saw only the taillights of a car vanishing into the storm. Oh God, Jane whispered, her voice breaking. They know. I'm calling the police. Logan said. No. She shook her head. They'll say I staged it. Thea will twist everything. She always does. Then what do we do? Jane looked around the shattered room, her face pale but steady. We don't run. This is my home. They can scare me, but they won't erase me. Jane, you're pregnant. You can't take that risk. That's exactly why I have to, she said. For me. For this baby. For Gracelyn. He stared at her, the woman who had once fallen apart now burning like a flame. The firelight danced in her eyes, fierce and alive. The next morning, Logan cleared the glass while Jane called Catherine. I want the case reopened, she said firmly. If I have to face them again, I will. But this time, I have evidence and a reason to fight. There was a pause. Then Catherine replied, I'll start the paperwork. When Jane hung up, Logan was standing outside, staring across the lake. The early light fell across his tired face, steady and determined. I filed the DNA request, he said. They can't stall forever. Jane stepped beside him, her voice soft. Aren't you afraid, Logan? He turned to her, his expression gentler than she'd seen in months. I am. But if I have to be afraid, I want to be afraid with you. She leaned her head lightly on his shoulder. The wind stirred the pine trees, carrying the scent of wet earth and rain. And in that moment, amid the threats, the crimson words, and the lingering fear, Jane realized she was no longer alone. That night, before she went to bed, she opened her journal and wrote, They can destroy my house. They can stain my name. But they will never take the faith I've just found again. Outside, mist covered the surface of Crescent Lake, reflecting a dim silver moon. A new chapter had begun, not one of running, but of standing her ground. Late September in Seattle carried a strange kind of cold quiet, sharp, almost mournful. The wind sighed through the pine trees around Crescent Lake, sounding nearly human. Jane sat by her desk, staring out at the lake shimmering faintly under the moonlight. Before her lay the new case file. Along with the court's order for a DNA test, Logan had driven it to the city that morning, carrying with him everything they still dared to hope for. She had stayed behind, alone with the growing unease that never seemed to fade. Ever since the break-in, every creak, every rustle made her heart jolt. Inside her, the baby stirred, reminding her that life doesn't wait until you're ready. The phone rang. Catherine's voice came through, breathless and tight. Jane, something's happened. The DNA test has been cancelled. Opal's in the hospital. She's claiming a miscarriage threat. The hospital confirmed her admission. Jane's fingers trembled. That's impossible. She's faking. I know, Catherine said, but we can't prove it yet. Logan's on his way back. Just stay calm. When the call ended, Jane stood for a long time, staring out at the trees trembling in the rain. A slow drizzle began to fall. Inside, the fire in the hearth flickered low, its light trembling over her father's old photograph on the wall. "Dad," she whispered, "how do you fight people who don't know how to fear?" Darkness deepened, and the rain thickened. Jane locked the doors, drew the curtains, yet still, she heard something outside, a faint crunch of footsteps on wet leaves. She grabbed the flashlight, heart pounding. A knock echoed soft at first, then again, louder. "Logan," she whispered. No answer. Cautiously, she cracked the door open and froze. Standing in the rain was Gracelyn, her daughter, the child she hadn't seen in over 3 months. "Gracie?" Jane's voice broke. The little girl stood shivering, her raincoat soaked, eyes wide with fear. "Mom, I had to run away." Jane dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her. The child's small body trembled against her. "Sweetheart, you came all by yourself? Does anyone know you're here?" Gracelyn shook her head. "No, Grandma and Aunt Opal were fighting. I got scared. I took Grandma's phone and ran." Jane shut the door quickly, wrapping her daughter in a blanket. They sat on the floor together, and Jane looked into those eyes, the same eyes she saw every morning in the mirror. "Gracie, what happened? Tell Mommy." The girl looked around, her voice a whisper. "I heard Grandma say she won't let you have any more babies. And Aunt Opal, she said she's scared you'll find out her secret." Jane felt her heart stop. "What secret, baby?" Gracelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a cracked silver phone. "This. I recorded it. Grandma always talks in her office, so I turned it on. I don't understand everything, but she said something about making it look real. Listen, Mommy." Jane's hands went cold. She pressed play. Thea's voice filled the room, clear, cold, unmistakable. "Tomorrow, she'll be ruined completely. Don't let her speak again." Then Opal's voice, shaky. "But if she suspects, if Logan finds out?" Thea again. "We have the fake ultrasound, the doctor's signature. We'll call her jealous, unstable. Who would believe a crazy woman?" A sound of a chair scraping, then glass shattering. "Just a few more months," Thea continued. "The fake pregnancy will end in a fake miscarriage. You'll be the victim and she'll disappear for good." Jane dropped the phone. Her face went pale. Tears filled her eyes. It was all a plan, a perfect, cruel illusion. "Oh God," she whispered. "They did all of it." Gracelyn clutched her mother's hand. "I'm scared, Mommy. What if Grandma finds me?" Jane pulled her close. "No, sweetheart. You're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again." Lightning flashed, throwing silver light across the room. Jane gripped the phone tightly. This was it, the proof they'd been waiting for. She called Logan immediately. His voice was rough with fatigue. "Jane, what's wrong?" "Gracelyn's here," she said. "She brought a phone. There's a recording, Thea and Opal. It's all there." Silence. Then Logan's breath caught. "I'm coming now. Be careful," Jane warned. "They might be watching." "I don't care," he said. "Now I know what I'm fighting for." By the time she hung up, Gracelyn had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching her soaked teddy bear. Jane tucked a blanket around her, then sat beside her, stroking her hair. "You're so brave," she whispered. "Tomorrow, everything changes." Outside, the rain kept falling, but for the first time, it didn't feel like sorrow. Because Jane knew after this storm, light would return. At dawn, Logan arrived, knocking softly so as not to wake the child. Jane opened the door, her eyes red from a sleepless night. "Where is she?" "In the bedroom, she's resting." Logan spotted the cracked phone on the table, its screen still glowing faintly. "This is it?" Jane nodded. "I've heard it all. Thea and Opal clear as day." He pressed play, listening in silence. His expression shifted from disbelief to fury to a deep, hollow stillness. When it ended, his fists clenched. "We've got them, Jane," he breathed. Finally, Jane put a hand on his shoulder. "They'll come for us. We need to get this to Catherine now." They packed quickly. Logan sealed the phone in a waterproof bag and started the car. Jane wrapped Gracelyn in a blanket and carried her out. The morning rain still drizzled, the forest road slick, but in their eyes burned the same resolve. As the car rolled away from the cabin, Jane looked back. The small wooden house stood silent in the mist, like a witness to her entire life. "Do you think they know yet?" she asked. "Probably," Logan said. "But it doesn't matter. We're done running." An hour later, they reached Catherine's office in Seattle. The lawyer stood as they entered. When she heard the recording, her eyes widened. "My God, this is enough to overturn everything. I'll file it today. You two need protective custody immediately." Jane exhaled, her shoulders trembling. "Finally," Logan touched her back gently. "I told you truth doesn't stay buried." By evening, the news was everywhere. Forgery scandal. Medical records in custody case under investigation. Opal was summoned for questioning. Thea remained silent, no statements, no appearances, only lawyers speaking in her place. But Jane knew. The real storm was only beginning. That night, back at the cottage, she sat beside Gracelyn's bed. The girl stirred and whispered, "Mommy, will they take Grandma and Aunt Opal away?" Jane brushed her hair gently. "Maybe, but don't be afraid. Grandma did wrong, but you don't have to hate her. Just remember, lies never win over the truth." Gracelyn nodded, eyes shining. "I just want to stay with you." Jane hugged her tightly. "And you will. I promise you'll never have to be afraid again." Outside, on the porch, Logan smoked quietly, the tip of his cigarette glowing red in the rain. Jane joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Tomorrow the investigation starts," he said. "Thea won't go down quietly." Jane smiled faintly. "She's been fighting all her life. Now it's our turn." "I worry for you," Logan murmured. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "But this time, fear doesn't make me run." They sat in silence, listening to the rain on the roof. "Thank you," Logan said at last, voice low, "for believing in me again." Jane looked at him, eyes soft but steady. "Not completely. Not yet. But I know this time you're telling the truth." He smiled, just a little. No more words were needed, only the rain, the lake's quiet breathing, and a faith reborn small but unbreakable. The next morning, when Jane opened the door, sunlight streamed across the porch for the first time in weeks. Dew glistened on the pine needles. She lifted Gracelyn into her arms and pointed upward. "See that, Gracie? After every storm, the sun always comes back." The little girl laughed and hugged her neck, and in that moment, every wound, every lie, seemed to fade into the warmth of their breath and the light of a new day. Jane knew they hadn't won yet, but for the first time, they hadn't lost. That morning, Seattle was wrapped in fog, the kind of stillness that felt like the city itself was holding its breath. The news spread like wildfire. Philanthropist Thea Taylor under investigation for medical record forgery and embezzlement. Jane's hands trembled as she read the headline on Catherine's computer screen. She sat in the lawyer's office, with Logan beside her and little Gracelyn curled up quietly in the corner. The room was small, but the air inside was taut as a drawn bow. "The police have issued a search warrant," Catherine said, flipping through a file. "Opal's already been called in for questioning this morning. She's terrified." "Good," Logan muttered. "She'll talk. She's weak, nothing like her mother." Jane stayed silent. Ever since hearing the recording, she'd braced herself for this moment. But now that it had come, her emotions were tangled: relief, sorrow, and something that felt almost like mourning. Not for Thea, but for the years she'd lost to believing in her. By noon, new footage hit the news. Police storming Thea's penthouse. Opal sobbed as officers led her out in handcuffs. Investigators seized computers filled with edited recordings, fake doctor invoices, and documents proving that Mr. Carter's inheritance had been siphoned off under false names. Jane watched in silence. Thea appeared last, escorted down the marble staircase, her hair perfectly pinned, her face calm as stone. Even now, she held her chin high. "She still looks proud," Logan murmured. "She won't plead guilty," Jane said quietly. "She never admit defeat." Catherine turned off the TV. "She doesn't have to. The evidence will speak for itself. Jane, get ready, the custody hearing is being reopened. This time, you'll win." Jane nodded. But as she stepped out of the office later that afternoon, she paused before the glass door and caught her reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the bride in white she once was. There was no trace of naive hope, no trembling from heartbreak, only calm strength, a woman who had looked into the dark and chosen to stand anyway. That evening, they returned to Crescent Lake. Logan sat near the fire, a mug of coffee in his hands. Gracelyn was at the table, drawing sometimes glancing up to smile at her parents. The air was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. After the chaos had subsided, Jane sat on the sofa, eyes following the flicker of the flames. "I didn't think it would all happen this fast," she said softly. "Not fast," Logan said, smiling faintly. "You've just been waiting for it long enough." She met his eyes. "Were you afraid? When did you see her arrested?" He hesitated. "Not afraid, just relieved and a little sad. Because no matter what she became, she would always be Opal's mother. And Opal, she's just another pawn in her game." "Being a pawn doesn't make you innocent," Jane said. "No," he agreed, "but it means we don't have to hate her." Jane nodded slowly. For the first time, she understood. Hate was only another kind of prison. Outside, the moon was climbing through the mist. Jane stepped onto the porch, the sound of gentle waves lapping at the shore. The baby stirred inside her, and she placed a hand on her belly. "It's almost over, little one," she whispered. Behind her, Logan came up quietly and wrapped his arms around her. No words, just warmth, two people breathing the same air, finally at peace. And for the first time, the lake reflected calm instead of sorrow. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. The same place where Jane had once been stripped of everything was now full of reporters and spectators waiting for the truth. Thea Taylor entered in a pale grey prison uniform, her hair tied neatly back, her face unreadable. Opal followed behind her, trembling. Jane sat in the front row, holding Logan's hand. Catherine stood beside her, voice firm as she submitted the evidence. "This is an authenticated recording provided by minor Gracelyn Carter Reed. Verified by forensic analysis, proof of falsified medical records and defamation of mental health." The room fell silent as the audio played. "Tomorrow, she'll be ruined completely." Thea's voice, cold and unmistakable, echoed through the chamber. Every head turned toward her. Even the judge's eyes hardened. Jane didn't look up. She gripped her hands until her nails pressed into her palms. Then Opal broke. She stood abruptly, tears spilling down her face. "It was Mother. She made me do it. I didn't want to. She said she'd cut me out of the will." Gasps filled the room. The judge banged his gavel for order. Jane finally lifted her gaze. For the first time, her eyes met Thea's. There was no anger left, only finality. Thea gave a faint, bitter smile. "Do you think you've won, Jane?" Jane's voice was calm. "No, you lost to yourself." The gavel struck. "The court hereby nullifies the prior ruling. Custody of Gracelyn Carter. Reed is restored to her biological mother, Jane Carter. Mrs. Thea Taylor and Miss Opal Taylor are to be prosecuted for medical fraud and defamation." The room erupted. Jane sat motionless as tears slipped down her cheeks. Logan's hand found hers and held on tight. "You did it, Jane," he whispered. "You got it all back." Gracelyn ran to her, wrapping small arms around her waist. "I told you, Mommy, you'd win." The crowd blurred away. All Jane could feel was lightness, the weight of years lifting off her shoulders. That afternoon, they drove away from the city. Sunlight streamed through the trees along the forest road. Gracelyn hummed softly in the back seat, while Logan reached across the console and took Jane's hand. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I can finally breathe." You deserve that," he said. She smiled. "So do you." They reached the cabin by sunset. The lake glowed a golden hue beneath the fading sky. Gracelyn ran to the porch, laughing. "Mommy, look, it's so pretty." Jane placed a hand on her belly, smiling gently. "Yes, sweetheart, it's beautiful because today is a new beginning." Logan slipped an arm around her shoulders. Together, they watched the sunlight dissolve into the water. That night, Jane opened her journal and wrote, "I've learned that justice isn't revenge. Justice is standing tall without fear. And today, I finally stood for myself, for my children, and for the man who never walked away." Outside, the wind rustled through the pines. The fire still glowed. And in the quiet cabin by the lake, 3 souls who had once been broken sat together silent. Not from sorrow, but from peace. December in Seattle bit through the skin like glass. The wind from the bay swept through the streets, forcing everyone to hunch deep into their coats. Inside a slow-moving taxi, Jane Carter sat quietly, one hand resting on her full, round belly, 9 months pregnant. Every slight kick inside her carried both fear and wonder, fear, because childbirth always walks the thin edge between life and death. Wonder, because this tiny heartbeat was proof that she still believed in something good. Beside her, Logan gripped her hand, eyes fixed on the wet streets ahead. He'd never looked so tense. "Are you sure you want to go through with this today? Catherine said she can represent you. You don't have to be there." Jane smiled faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, I need to. I've come through everything they did to me. I need to see it end with my own eyes." The taxi pulled up in front of the King County Courthouse, the same building where she'd once been declared unfit to be a mother. Today, she was back. Not to beg, but to finish. The corridors were packed with reporters. Flashbulbs popped like small explosions. People whispered her name as if it meant something beyond scandal now. Jane Carter, the woman who was betrayed but stood back up. She ignored them. She only tightened her grip on Logan's hand, took a deep breath, and stepped through the crowd. The courtroom was large and cold, every tick of the clock sharp and audible. Thea Taylor sat at the defendant's table, her once silver hair neatly tied, her pale face a portrait of stubborn pride. Whatever power had once radiated from her eyes was gone, replaced by the hard gleam of a woman who knew she was cornered. Opal sat a few rows behind, hands cuffed, eyes down. The makeup, the vanity gone. She looked like a ghost. Catherine leaned toward Jane and whispered, "Just tell the truth. You don't have to be strong. The truth already is." Jane nodded. When the judge called her name, she rose. Her footsteps echoed softly across the wood floor, each one sealing another chapter of her past. She placed a hand on her stomach and spoke, her voice calm and clear. "My name is Jane Carter. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for the truth. I was slandered, humiliated, and declared insane because I trusted the wrong people. But today, I want this court to remember, justice doesn't come from pretty words. It comes from the bare truth." Then she turned toward Thea, meeting her eyes without flinching. "You won for years. You made everyone believe I was a liar. But you forgot sometimes it takes a child to reveal what adults try to hide. And Gracelyn did." The room fell silent. Thea's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Catherine continued with the evidence while Jane sat down, beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite the chill in the air. Logan bent close. "Are you okay?" Jane nodded weakly, but pain flickered in her eyes. Her fingers clenched around her belly. When Thea was called to testify, she still spoke with the same poised calm. "I only did what was necessary to protect my family's honor." The judge leaned forward. "By falsifying records, bribing doctors, and framing your stepdaughter." Thea's eyes swept the courtroom before she replied, measured, deliberate. "I did it because I loved my daughter." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jane whispered, "You never loved anyone but yourself." The judge called for order, but the room had already changed. When Catherine played the final recording, the one where Thea threatened Opal, "If you betray me, you won't live long enough to regret it," the courtroom erupted. Jane closed her eyes. Tears streamed down, not from triumph, but from the release of a pain she'd carried too long. Then she felt it, a deep, sharp contraction that made her gasp. "Jane!" Logan's voice broke. She gripped his hand, breathless. It's time. My God, you're in labor." The judge immediately called a recess. Logan helped her to her feet as people parted around them. The echo of hurried footsteps followed them down the hallway. Just before reaching the doors, Jane turned back. Thea still sat there, motionless, her sharp eyes locked on Jane. Jane's voice was faint, but steady. "You can win everything, Thea, but not this." She pressed her hand to her belly, smiled weakly, and let Logan lead her away. Seattle Grace Memorial Hospital, the same place where Jane had once woken after collapsing on her wedding day. Now, she was here to bring life into the world. The monitors beeped steadily, the lights glared a bright white, and the nurses moved quickly. "Stay with me," Logan said, clutching her hand. "I'm here," she panted. "Don't let go." "I won't. I swear." The contractions came hard and fast. Jane screamed, her face wet with sweat and tears. Logan kissed her forehead, voice breaking. "You're the strongest person I know. You've already survived worse. You can do this." Time dissolved into a blur of pain and motion, until at last, a sharp, clear cry broke through the room. A baby's cry. "It's a girl," the nurse said softly, her eyes shining. "Both mother and baby are healthy." Logan choked out a laugh that turned into tears. He held the tiny bundle wrapped in white, eyes still closed, fists curling gently, and brought her to Jane. Jane smiled through her tears. "Hello, Claire," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Logan kissed his daughter's forehead. Claire Reed, the child of light. At that exact moment, back at the courthouse, the judge's gavel fell. Thea Taylor is found guilty of document forgery, bribery, and defamation. The court sentences her to 12 years in prison. Catherine called that night. Logan answered. "She did it," Catherine said softly. "It's over." I.e. Logan looked at Jane sleeping peacefully. Claire curled against her chest, the soft glow of the hospital lamp lighting their faces. "No," he said quietly. "It's just beginning." 3 days later, they were discharged. Jane stood by the hospital window, watching the city blanketed in white. "The first time I came here," she whispered, "I lost everything. This time, I'm leaving with the world." Logan slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Justice comes late sometimes, but it comes. And I couldn't be prouder of you." Jane turned to him, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it if you'd walked away." He brushed a thumb over her cheek. "I walked away once, Jane. I'll never do it again." She smiled softly. In her arms, Claire stirred, tiny eyes blinking open. In that moment, Logan knew everything he'd lost had come back to him, whole and new. That evening, they returned to Crescent Lake. Snow lay thick on the roof. Warm yellow light spilled through the windows. Jane placed Claire gently in her crib and sat by the fire. Logan handed her a mug of hot cocoa. "What did you say to her?" he asked after a while. Before we left the courtroom, Jane took a sip, smiling faintly. "I told her she could destroy everything, but she could never kill hope, because hope knows how to be born again." Logan smiled and squeezed her hand. "Just like you." She shook her head softly. "No, like our daughter." They both turned toward the crib, where little Claire slept peacefully, lips curved into a faint smile. Outside, snow drifted silently over the pines, cloaking the world in white. Jane leaned her head on Logan's shoulder and whispered, "At last, we've found an ending that feels like a beginning." Spring returned to Crescent Lake like a breath of forgiveness. The water was glass clear, mirroring a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Mist hung low, soft as a veil. Dew clung to the wooden railings of the porch, glittering like scattered stars. Jane Carter stood by the doorway, holding baby Claire in her arms, watching sunlight ripple across the lake. Claire was 6 months old now, bright-eyed, dark-haired, a perfect reflection of Logan. Inside, Gracelyn sat cross-legged on the floor with a book. Every so often, she'd glance up and giggle when Claire kicked or squealed. "She's laughing again," Gracie cried, running over. Jane smiled, handing the baby to her. "Careful, she's still tiny." Gracelyn cradled her sister with quiet pride. "You know, Mom, I think Claire really loves the Sunday. She always smiles when it's bright." Jane brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Just like her mother. Outside, Logan was mending the fence. He still preferred to do things himself, despite Jane's gentle protests. "I told you," he'd said once with that familiar grin. "Working with my hands reminds me I'm alive." Now, when he heard their laughter through the open door, he looked up. His brown eyes softened. No storms, no fear, just the peace of being exactly where he belonged. The cottage by the lake had changed. Cracks patched, roof repaired, the living room filled with books, and a second-hand piano Jane had bought at the town market. She worked as a freelance editor, now quiet jobs, small manuscripts, enough to keep life steady and warm. Sometimes letters came from Catherine. In one, she'd written, "Thea won't be out anytime soon. Opal's in therapy. I think she truly regrets it. Jane, forgiveness isn't about who deserves it, it's about who deserves peace." Jane folded the letter and looked out over the lake. She no longer hated Thea or Opal, because without them, she might never have learned how to stand. That evening, they had dinner on the porch. Fireflies blinked through the twilight. Logan watched the two girls giggling over dessert, then turned to Jane. "I've got something to ask you." Jane looked up, smiling. "What's that?" He stood, came around the table, and dropped to one knee. The golden light caught in his eyes, and for a heartbeat, Jane forgot to breathe. "Jane Carter," he began slowly, voice deep and steady. "We were married once, wrong time, wrong way. But now, I want to do it again. Not to erase the past, but to start it right. Will you marry me? One more time." Jane froze. In that moment, everything came rushing back. The church, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the quiet house by the lake, and the baby is sleeping inside. She blinked, tears catching the light. "You know how scared I am of marriage, Logan." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I won't promise forever. I'll promise to choose you every morning." Jane laughed through her tears. "That's the strangest proposal I've ever heard." "Good," he smiled. "I'm done chasing perfection. I want the truth." "Lem." Gracelyn clapped her hands. "Say yes, Mom. I want to be the flower girl." They all burst out laughing. Jane nodded, slipping her hand into his. "All right. But this time, no white lilies, no grand vows, no fancy dress, just us and the girls." Logan's grin spread wide. "That's all I ever wanted." A month later, on a gentle May afternoon, they held a small ceremony by the lake. No orchestra, no glittering crowd, just a handful of friends, Catherine as their witness, and the two girls giggling in the sunlight. Jane wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Logan, in a pale blue shirt, carried a handful of wildflowers. When she walked toward him, Gracelyn scattered petals at her feet, while baby Claire cooed in Catherine's arms as if she somehow understood. "You know," Logan whispered as she reached him, "the first time I saw you in a wedding dress, I thought the world stopped. Today, I feel peace." Jane smiled. "Peace is the most beautiful thing I've ever found." Their vows were spoken to the rhythm of the wind and the waves. No stage, no spotlights, just truth. "I, Logan Reed, choose you, Jane Carter, not because you're perfect, but because every day I want to choose you again, rain or shine. And I, Jane Carter, choose you, not because you never left, but because when everyone did, you stayed." Catherine's voice trembled with a smile. "I now pronounce you chosen again." An applause, soft, heartfelt. Logan leaned in and kissed her, a kiss with no storm in it, only warmth, only gratitude. "Mama," Gracelyn cried, "we're a real family now, right?" Jane laughed, pulling her close. "Yes, baby. Not because we're perfect, but because we choose each other every day." Claire laughed too, a sound like sunlight through rain. That night, the sun sank behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the lake. The family sat on the porch, listening to the first cicadas of summer. Jane rested her head on Logan's shoulder while the girls played at their feet. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "if Opal hadn't lied, would we have been happy like this?" Logan thought for a long moment. "No. Because back then, we didn't know what happiness really meant. You only learn to cherish what remains when you've lost everything else." Jane nodded. "I think so too." A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and new grass. The lake shimmered under the rising moon. Jane looked at her reflection in the water, no longer the broken bride, the betrayed woman, a mother, a survivor, someone who had learned to be happy, not by chance, but by choice. She turned to him, smiling softly. "Happiness isn't magic, Logan. It's a choice. And today, I choose you, as I did, as I do, and as I always will." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "And I choose you, every single day." Inside, the lights glowed warm. Gracelyn held her sister close, whispering, "Sleep now, Claire. Mom and Dad are here." The lake whispered against the shore, a lullaby of its own. Above them, the stars began to shimmer, and by the quiet waters of Crescent Lake, a family once broken, now whole, sat wrapped in peace, not because of miracles, but because they had chosen love, again and again. Thank you for walking beside me through 10 chapters of Jane Carter and Logan Reed, the happiness we choose. From tears to laughter, from betrayal to forgiveness, this journey has been about finding light in the places we thought were gone. Jane is more than a character, she's every person who has fallen and still dared to rise. And Logan is proof that real love isn't perfect. It's honest. If this story touched you, even a little, if it made you believe again in people, or in second chances, please like, share, and subscribe to join me for the next journey toward healing. Because sometimes, all we really need is a story that knows how to hold our hearts. See you in the following story, where love always finds its way back, no matter how late.